Hello and welcome back to the second session of our class. Thank you for returning. This is the second class of our study of Coups and his spiritual wisdom in leading and in healing the Crow Nation back after the destruction of their culture. If you remember last week, I asked three questions regarding general knowledge, and I did have a responder to the first responder. Excuse me, and identified the three small bones in the middle ear with words that sounded to me somewhat like made-up countries in Africa, but then caught themselves and responded with Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. Hopefully you are laughing with me, because I recognize that the first session seemed extremely serious. And even with a small joke, I experienced what late night comedians are experiencing at this time, that without an audience, there's no feedback. So I didn't smile even at my own jokes. I think I might need a laugh track to at least fool myself into thinking what I'm saying might be funny. Also, I realized how often I touch my face. But in my defense, I do have a lot of face to touch. But now I have another concern. Without being able to get a haircut, and maybe some of you in the audience can help me with this, what do I do with all this hair? Just yesterday, I had to use one of those things that are kind of black. They have teeth on them. A comb. Yeah, I had to use a comb. I also heard from Sarah Toll, and she answered all the questions correctly. And she reminded me that she did not have to Google them to answer the questions. She also recommended a couple of books on Native American history. One of them is entitled Pretty Shields, and the other is Wooden Leg, the story of a Northern Cheyenne warrior. Well, folks, it's been quite a week. I trust that you are all taking care of yourselves and doing for others as best you can. I want to share something with you that I just saw on TV recently. And let's together just take ourselves in a few minutes and quiet ourselves and practice what this gentleman entitled 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So sit quietly, take a deep breath, and be aware of 5 things around you that you can see, 4 things around you that you can touch safely, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. What that does is it brings us to the present. And that's really all we can deal with at the moment. I want to repeat some of the caveats that I'd mentioned in the first lecture. I am not a theologian. I'm not Native American. I do not pretend to speak for Native Americans. And though I worked, with Native Americans for 23 years on all the reservations in Montana and Wyoming, I am not an expert on their culture, or their spirituality, or for that matter, anyone's spirituality. I'm leaning heavily on a book entitled Radical Hope, Ethics in the Face of Cultural Devastation. It's a book written by Jonathan Lear. During this session, I'd like to spend a little bit more time with Coups as he grapples with the message that he received from the chickadee. In Nicholas Kristof's lecture here at the university on March 10th in Missoula, and I'm sure that many of you were there for that lecture, he spoke of the destruction of the fiber that was his hometown, Yamhill, Oregon. He discussed and argued rightfully that we all have some personal responsibility for this destruction. We have not tugged hard enough on our own bootstraps. But he does not think that personal responsibility alone completely addresses the issue. He argues that a second feature that resulted in the destruction of the fiber of Yamhill was the failure of the state and the federal government to provide a sufficient social net for Yamhill and its citizens, and for many other rural and urban areas. A social net to adequately address the loss of meaningful work, of addiction problems, housing problems, poverty problems, issues that destroy lives and families generation after generation, and thus destroy the communities in which they live. A tragic cultural devastation of rural Middle America. And I have no argument with Mr. Christoph, as if I have either the credentials or the ability to confront him on this position. And I support his call for greater social networks. And certainly this church, through our social justice work, extends both its treasures and its talents to addressing and solving the above-mentioned issues. But I want to give some credence today to Coups and the spiritual nature of his approach to leading his nation out of this cultural devastation. I was sitting recently with a much trusted friend, and that's before social isolation had become the theme of the time, and we were lamenting the loss of spirituality, the loss of the belief in something that is greater than any of us. The Crow tribe, as do many other Native American tribes, have an established practice of encouraging the younger members of the tribe to go off into nature and to dream. To the Crow, the visions they had in a dream could provide access to the order of the world beyond anything available to ordinary, conscious understanding. And I wonder sometimes, does this sound like anything that many of us here at Holy Spirit Parish and in other places using different modalities often practice? In seeking a dream vision, a young man would typically take a sweat and then go off to a remote spot to fast and to dream. The sweat, the fasting, the peace of a remote area was supposed to induce receptiveness, to prepare him to receive his dream. I personally have often found that sort of receptiveness come from kayaking, from cycling, sitting quietly in the pew on a Sunday morning, looking at the beauty of our stained glass windows, listening to the music of Nancy on the organ, sitting on the dock of Lindbergh Bay and listening to the music of our Compline choir. It makes me more available to a world that is not always accessible to me, and I suspect to many of you. Many of you have similar or maybe entirely different practices that allow you the peace necessary to make you receptive to thoughts that may be beyond our conscious understanding. Young Coups was first called up to go and dream when he was 9 years old in about 1856. He went to the mountaintop, and on the first night, he had no dream. So he chopped off a piece of his finger to encourage a vision. In contrast now, a little fasting or putting on your Sunday best to go to church or a sermon that runs longer than 10 minutes doesn't seem like much of an onerous practice compared to chopping off part of one's finger. But this was not an unusual practice. It has been reported that at that time, it was difficult to find any adult male with all of his fingers. Plentycoups' typical prayer to God began with a plea, "Pity me." The Crow, as did other American Indian tribes, have a theory of dreams. They took dreams to be meaningful, to be revealed to them often in enigmatic form. They saw dreams as a means of getting some sort of authoritative word on whether or not their wishes would be gratified. They understood that the deeper meanings of dreams were often not transparent and required the interpretation of wise, older members of the tribe. This practice is one many of you will identify in the Christian tradition as a prayer practice, some as a meditative practice, and others as an inspiration that comes from communion with nature or any combination of the above. My understanding of dreams, as interpreted by Freud, is that Freud thought that humans were alone in the universe, that dreams were a human response to a human wish, however they were disguised. The Crow did not believe this. They believe that humans have a meaningful place in a meaningful world that contained spirits and a single God, Abadate. These prayer visions were often a plea to Abadate because they felt the world itself was slightly out of kilter and beyond the scope of a human endeavor to change it on its own. The dream would often be revealed to them by a visit from a spirit that would explain just how the order of the world could be adjusted so as to gratify one's wish. Just as with any prayer meditative practice, the answers may not be the answers we are seeking, or they may simply not be understandable to us. Plentycoups' dream was not understood by him. He was the receiver of the message, one he did not understand. And remember, he was only 9 years old at the time. The dream, as he recalls it when he returned to speak to his elders, and he says, "On the second night in the wilderness, I had this dream. I see a buffalo bull who I know is a person who wants me. I travel to a certain place, and the bull turns into a man person wearing a buffalo robe. I follow him by sinking into the hole. I see countless buffaloes. I am among them. Then back out into the sun. Man person shakes his ceremonial red rattle. Look, he points. Out of the hole in the ground come the buffalo, bulls and cows and calves without number. They spread wide and blacken the plains. Everywhere I look, great herds of buffalo were going in every direction, and still others without number were pouring out of the hole. When at last they ceased coming out of the hole, all were gone, all of them. There was not one in sight anywhere, even out on the plains. I saw a few antelope on the hillside, but no buffalo, not a bull, not a cow, not one calf was anywhere on the plains. The man person shook his red rattle again. Look! Out of the hole in the ground came these bulls and cows and calves, past counting. These, like the others, scattered and spread on the plains. But they stopped in small herds and began to eat the grass. Many lay down, not as a buffalo does, but different, and many of them were spotted. Hardly any two were alike in color or in size, and the bulls bellowed differently. Not deep in far sounding like the bull of the buffalo, but sharper and yet weaker to my ears. Their tails were longer and nearly brushed the ground. They were not buffalo. They were strange animals from another world. Do you understand this which I have shown you, Plenty-Coup? The tribe and its elders, however, so believed an interpretation of the dream that they used it to face to a radically different future. And Man-Person stood facing south, looking as if the spotted buffalo belonged there. That was the story as he related it. But there's another part of the dream that I believe deserves mentioning at this point. The Man-Person invites Plenty-Coup to look at a very old man in the shade of a particular tree. Plenty-Coup felt pity for this old man sitting in the shade because he seemed old and he seemed feeble. And Man-Person says, "Do you know who this is, Plenty-Coup?" "No," answers Plenty-Coup. "Well, that old man is you." Then there is a tremendous storm in which the four winds blow, begin a war against the forest. All the trees are blown down, but the one under which Plenty-Coup sits, and happens to be the home of the chickadee. And if you visit the Plenty-Coup Park in Pryor, Montana, the museum is there, and that tree remains standing. In the dream, the dreamer recognized that he is not able to grasp its meaning. The young dreamer returns to the tribe, recounts his dreams to the wise men of the tribe. It is interesting to note that the young were sent out to dream, to accept, to receive the messages from God, but it relied on the old men to say what these messages meant. These elders listened, and it was Yellow Bear, the wisest man in the tribe, who offered this interpretation. He had been told that in his lifetime, the buffalo will go away forever, and that in the place on the plains will come the bulls and cows and calves of the white man. I have myself seen these spotted buffalo drawing loads of the white man's goods. The dream of Plenty-Coup means that the white man will take and hold this country, and that their spotted buffalo will cover the plains. He was told to listen, to learn to avoid disaster by the experience of others. He was advised to develop his body, but not to forget his mind. The meaning of his dream is plain to me. I see its warning. The tribes who have fought the white man have all been beaten, wiped out, by listening as the chickadee listens. Possibly, we may escape and keep our lands, says Yellow Bear. So it seems that for the crow, dream interpretation consisted in showing how the vision embodied in a dream applied or would come to apply to reality. The crow could understand the dream as a key to the challenges they had to face. They decided on a foreign policy, not as we think of foreign policy, but rather a policy that was foreign to them, a policy that would guide their acts for the next century. You have probably heard that it is a Native American tradition to make decisions based upon how it will affect their tribe 7 generations out. The message from the chickadee told them that their buffalo hunting way of life was coming to an end. But what is important is that the information obtained from the vision quest, the fasting, and the prayer is not just another piece of information. The crow took the chickadee's message as providing access to a spirit-filled realm, and it is the hallmark of this calm and this realm that is not fully understood in human terms. Whether it be a dream or a response to a prayer, the answer is often enigmatic, in need of interpretation, in need of clarification. This particular message from the chickadee did not make sense to the crow until nearly 60 years later, when that dream predicted the demise of the way of the Crow Nation, and that this message was guidance from a divine source. As one can imagine, a divinely guided message that appeared to loosely inform the Crow Nation that their way of life was coming to an end caused some anxiety. Anxiety seems to be a universal response to the possibility of a historical rupture of a way of life that the Crow had experienced for hundreds of years. Think of the anxiety that planet Earth seems to be experiencing today. Think how this pandemic has changed the lives that we have lived for generations. The dream charged Plenty-Coup and the tribal elders to anticipate a future they did not yet know how to think about. The tribe's problem was not just that they did not know what the future had in store, they lacked the concepts with which to experience it. And as an analogy, think of our parents and our grandparents. If the concept of the internet or our way of communicating via cell phones and emails had suddenly been revealed to them in their early years. A cell phone arrives when they are still dealing with dialing a phone, or a phone tethered to a base, or even to a phone with a party line. They would have no structure to understand what was being presented. And I have a story about this. When I first moved to Missoula, my mother came to visit me. And at that time, we had my nephew, her grandson, was in Vietnam. And I said, Mom, Jeremy would love to hear from you. And I said, here, I have email. Let's just type him a note from you. And my mother is a business major. She's a wonderful typist. And so I set up the email with the address and everything, and my mother sits with her fingers on the keys. And I come back in about 20 minutes. And my mother is sitting there nearly paralyzed, and sweat is dripping down her lip. And I said, Mom, what's wrong? And she just looked at me and said, I can't do this. I was asking my mom to function in a world that she did not understand at all. She was afraid she would do something that would break the world, that would break the internet, that would cause calamity. And she did not know what to do at that time. But the dream that came to the Crow was so important to the Crow tribe that even though they could not foresee the future, and this is important, they trusted in the dream. They trusted the fact that they saw themselves going forward in the light of a dream vision toward an enigmatic future. They trusted in the virtue of the chickadee. They trusted in the message that they should become more chickadee-like. They trusted because though the chickadee was least in strength, he or she was the strongest of mind. The chickadee had other virtues. The chickadee was willing to work for wisdom. He was a good listener. Nothing escaped his ear. When others were talking of the successes and failure, there you would have the chickadee listening to their words. Becoming chickadee-like is a virtue, a form of human excellence. After one acquires the ability to learn from the wisdom of others, one could survive the coming storm. The lodges of many bird people were in the forest when the four winds blew that day. When only one is left It is the lodge of the chickadee. It is the wisdom to listen and learn from others that Plenty-Coup exhibits some 60 years after the dream comes from the chickadee. To pray, to meditate, to commune with nature, to trust our visions, to listen and learn from others, to depend upon our brains, not necessarily our brawn, all appeared to be practices that not only benefited the crow, but might be wise practices for us today. Let me repeat the wisdom that was the chickadee's. He was strong of mind. He was willing to work for wisdom and understanding. He had good listening skills. He had a willingness to learn from the stories of other successes and failures to plan a way forward. Because the crow adopted the wisdom of the chickadees, that wisdom combined with the virtue of the crow tribe, truthfulness, the virtual truthfulness. They trusted in dreams. They trusted in divine presence. They trusted that they would be shown a way forward from the future destruction of their culture, their way of life. They were led to what Jonathan Lear describes as radical hope, and also the spirit that engendered that radical hope. If a dream comes from a divine source and tells us that our way of life will come to an end, and it tells us how to survive the destruction of our traditional way of life, we should expect that there is much about the message and much about the future that we will not understand. Still, the message purports to come from an absolute source, a divine source. And that kind of authority could conceivably provide something to hold on to in the face of overwhelming challenges. In March earlier this year, Gretchen's sermon reflected upon the division of the church history from a book by Harvey Cox. The first divisions were the age of faith and the age of belief. Cox suggests that in the 1900s, we began transitioning from the age of belief to the age of spirit. In the age of spirit, we depend upon the experience of Jesus rather than a belief in Jesus. The emphasis is on the non-dogmatic, the non-institutional, and the non-hierarchical. The way to understand faith is based on a person's connection to the volatile expression of God's Spirit through mystery, wonder, and awe. It's experienced in churches, but also in music concerts, during meditation, or in the solitude found in nature. Cox believes the spiritual, communal, and justice-seeking dimensions of Christianity are its leading edge. The parallels to Plenty-Coup experienced on the mountain during this fast and vision quest, the experience of mystery, wonder, and awe being delivered to a 9-year-old child through a dream seems clear. Recently, this way to experience the awe and the wonder of the unexplainable was made available to me in a book by Michael Pollan called How to Change Your Mind. He describes sessions where participants are led to experience the awe and wonder of spirituality, expressed in a dream state of love, which they described, I think in a very poetic sort of way, as a river flowing. But rather than being constrained or confined by the banks of that river, the river flows out into a never-ending lake. That the participants in this experiment exited their experience with great calm, awe, wonder, and a deep appreciation of spirit, of spirituality. Please understand, I am not recommending the use of psychedelics. I use it as a reference because of the somewhat universal experience of individuals who are guided in these experiences about a transcendence they experience, about an arrival at a spiritual consciousness that they had previously been unavailable to obtain, an experience that seems beyond our ability to experience. A glorious experience of love, wonder, and awe. And whether through prayers, dreams, meditation, vision quests, fasting, or possibly through psychedelics, the transcendence could be seen as a divine call for suspension of traditional life. In order to survive or to really flourish, we may all have to be willing to give up almost everything we understand about the good life. Plenty Coups' dream and our prayers, meditation, etc., provide us some commitment to a goodness that transcends our current understanding of the good. It is our way to open our imaginations and our hearts and our minds to a radically different set of future possibilities. We have to be committed to understand to a world transcending our necessarily limited attempt to understand it. The world oftentimes thinks that religion breeds arrogant intolerance, and I'm afraid we may be guilty of that sometimes, thinking that we and we only have a direct line to God. But Plenty Coups' spirituality led him, as it should us, towards humility, an admission that he and us often have to admit we do not know what is coming. We do not know God's will. What we have, and what Plenty Coups had, was to embrace a position to adopt a peculiar form of hopefulness, of radical hopefulness. A hope for a life in a form that may not yet be intelligible to us, or if intelligible, not to be accepted by us. Plenty Coups and we have to commit to an idea that history, or a way of life that we are comfortable with, may be coming to an end. And I'm not talking about end times eschatologically, but rather an end of a way that is presently comfortable for us. And though Plenty Coups' dream had divine sanction, perhaps even the conception of God would change in ways that were unimaginable, that our prayers, dreams may provide at best a source of guidance that we may celebrate and experience as God, as Cox suggests, the spirit of Jesus, rather than a dogmatic belief in Jesus. I.e., we need to be open to the same radical hope, a hope that after this storm, something good will result as it did for the crow. It is this radical hope that allowed the crow to escape their sense of despair. And it is this radical hope that may provide all of us for a way to go forward, to flourish in a life that we do not yet completely understand. Thank you very much. Our next session together will delve more into this concept of radical hope, maybe in a more meaningful way for all of us. Again, I invite you to send your questions, if you have any, or comments, to gahtrek@bresnan.net, or to text them to me at 239-7346. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next week for our third and final session. Thank you.